Kaiser. I'm very delighted to be here to present this talk with Kat Fitzpatrick. I'm especially happy to be in this beautiful upstate New York setting. I live in Florida now, but I grew up about 2 hours west of here in Syracuse. And living in Florida, I have to say, I miss the 4 seasons that you all enjoy up here. In Florida, we only have 3 seasons. We have hurricane season, followed by snowbird season, followed by hot. And that brings us to the topic that we're discussing today, Vietnam, a place that was hot in every sense of the word. So I guess I can go back here now that you can hear me. So I want you to imagine that you have entered a time machine. Sit back and relax as Kat and I share some stories about our time living in Vietnam during the last days of that regime. What happened? I think most of you know where Vietnam is, but for those of you who don't, it's a little strip of land bordered by the South China Sea. And who would believe that a country so small could have such a huge impact on so many people? We begin the story in 1973. Whoops. North and South Vietnam had been at war for more than 2 decades. But in 1973, big changes were about to happen. In January, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, which were intended to bring about a long-sought ceasefire. In March, the United States pulled out all of its combat troops, and Hanoi released all of the prisoners of war. And in July, I arrived in Saigon. Why would I go to a war zone? Helen Keller once said, life is either a grand adventure or it's nothing at all. And I was ready for a grand adventure, and so was my husband. His company had won a contract with the U.S. Agency for International Development to reorganize the South Vietnamese Highway Department, and that's what took us there. The project was supposed to last for 3 years, and we expected we would be there the whole time. Also, we thought the war was over, like everybody else. Now I gotta make this play. Whoops, this is not playing.
Suppose you could just cross over it.
Whoops, I have to use this. Okay.
It might not have loaded. Essentially, as a journalist, Greenway, who is knew a lot about Vietnam, saying that he had gone back to report, and there were no Americans there, which was not true because there were nearly
no Americans. At the time, there were 6,000 Americans living and working in South Vietnam, some of them families with small children. I had been told that Saigon was the Paris of the Orient, so I expected to see something like this when I arrived. But nothing looked familiar. Saigon in those days could be described in 3 words: heat, smog, and noise. The city was overcrowded and crumbling as villagers from the rural areas swarmed into Saigon looking for work. Some of them with no other options turned to panhandling or petty crime. This young lady, although she lived off the charity of others, had a safe place to do it on the street outside a USAID building. The street was also home to vendors of all kinds. They were observant and kind, and I'll never forget the vendor who pulled me back onto the curb as I was about to step in front of a speeding motorcycle. I don't think I could have survived without the kindness and generosity of the Vietnamese people. The first place I lived was a tall 3-story villa, so-called villa, on a dusty street across from a trash collection site. It was very modern, in my opinion. It had 3 air conditioners. Along with the house, we were expected to hire servants. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to deal with servants. I never had that experience. But these 2 women came to us on the recommendation of a friend's cook, and they were magnificent. I don't think I could have survived without them, for sure. They did everything for us in the house. So with no duties at home, I had all my time free, and I wanted to explore Saigon, see what it had to offer. And I decided to learn Vietnamese. So I hired Pauline, Vietnamese, to tutor me in Vietnamese. She showed up at my house 2 days a week, and after a few weeks, I could pronounce the street names correctly. I could count and negotiate and bargain, and I had a few social phrases that I could use. So I was ready to set out to explore the city, and the only transportation available to me were the taxis and the cyclos. Of the 2 of these, I much preferred the cyclos. It was such an adventure riding in those contraptions, feeling like a human bumper. It was amazing how they could be maneuvered around traffic. So what would the day in the life of an American expat look like? Well, you might start out with a visit to the beauty salon, where you could get the full works for $5. Or you might stop by your dressmaker for a fitting of a custom outfit that you'd ordered. This might seem like a luxury to have custom-made clothes, but really it wasn't. It was a necessity because nothing ready-made came in Western sizes. After that arduous morning, you're going to need a rest at the French sporting club, Cercle Sportif, where you would stop for a citron pressé, aka a lemonade, sit on the terrace under the fans for a breeze, watch a game of tennis, or have lunch. Expats everywhere want 2 things. Connection to home is one. For that, we had Defense Attaché office complex. This was a small military presence in the country whose job was to support the South Vietnamese armed forces and to collect military intelligence that they would share. They also had a large recreational facility with tennis courts, swimming pool, library, restaurant, you name it. Because it was military, they also supported PX and commissary. And for the first year we were there, we had privileges to shop there for such American essentials as toothpaste, peanut butter, and toilet paper. The first sign that things were about to change was when we lost privileges to shop at the PX and commissary. We didn't know why. It seemed capricious, but there you are. We were thrown into the full expat experience living on the economy. The only time we could get American products was on the black market. The second thing that expats need is a sense of community. And for that, there was no place better than the American Women's Association of Saigon. This organization was open to all American women. They sponsored cultural events like this artist reception. They sponsored volunteer opportunities to work in hospitals or orphanages. They hosted an annual fashion show every April. And they also listed job opportunities, which interested me greatly. First year I was there, I was a teacher at the Wynn International School, where I was responsible for helping 4- and 5-year-old children improve their English language skills, assisted by my companion Janet, ethnic Chinese young woman who was invaluable to me. The second year I was there, I worked at the Phoenix Study Group as a librarian. This was a school for children of Americans. Now, besides organizing the library collection, I was tasked with designing furniture for the library. I had never done such a thing, so I had to wing it. On a wing and a prayer, I gave Mr. Bui.com some specifications, and a week later he delivered 4 sturdy chairs and 4 sturdy tables and 16 sturdy chairs that were a little wonky looking, legs a little too long, seats a little too wide, but they worked. And the only regret I have is that I don't have pictures of them. When we wanted to get out of the city, we would often go to Pointe to the beach. A project driver from my husband's office would drive us as long as we could get there before dark, because it was a well-known Viet Cong stronghold. So after a few months, we were enjoying the expat life, entertaining, lunching out with the ladies, relaxing at home. I first heard the explosions on the way home from a dinner party at a friend's house. I didn't see a flash of light or anything, I just heard it, a bomb. And my husband, trying to calm me down, told me it was just the South Vietnamese army having target practice. But after that, it seemed like every night was haunted by the sound of explosions somewhere close. Not close enough to really scare us, but they were always there. Saigon was a city of rumors. You never quite knew what to believe. You'd hear a story about a skirmish here or a little mix-up someplace in the Delta, but nothing bad ever happened in Saigon, and so we were just not worried. The war first affected Saigon in December of '73, when the Viet Cong blew up the Nha Bay fuel depot. 600,000 gallons of gasoline went up in smoke, and everybody got nervous. Nha Bay was 10 miles south of Saigon. We had decisions to make, though. We still had the project going on. USAID still wanted its work product delivered on time. The rent on our villa was due a year in advance, had to be paid a year in advance, in cash, American dollars. We thought the situation was just a little too risky to encumber all that money up front, so we moved to a month-to-month rental in a building down this rather interesting lane. And you can see the building itself on the right, with all the children who always swarmed around me every time I went in or went out. They always seemed to accept me. They were just curious. I hired a new maid named Mui. She was loyal and kind and did everything for us. She spoke an interesting mix of French and English. And one night at dinner, she liked to talk to us at dinner. She asked me, "Madame, like dog for dinner?" And I looked at my husband and he looked at me and I said, "Dog? Mui, you mean dog?" And I wondered if Dee Dee was all right. My neighbors had a dog named Dee Dee. She said, "Yes, Madame, no, dog. Quack, quack, quack." All the living room furniture was locally made and I still have some of it 50 years later. And also, in '74, the United States Congress had been fed up with supporting this seemingly endless conflict and reduced funding to Vietnam, and a new family arrived in Saigon.
I gotta go up that way.
So as Karen said, my family arrived in Saigon in 1974 in July. I was 8 years old, one of 7. We had a big family, and because my father had worked in Korea for 2 years and then been transferred to Saigon, they said, actually Saigon's not safe, why don't you go to Taiwan? So for 2 years, he came back every 6 weeks. But he wrote to me and he said, I think you'll like it here. It should be a great adventure for our whole family. And this is he and I on Pointe, which she had mentioned was a Viet Cong stronghold, though I was never aware of it at the time. We moved there partly despite the rumors and things that might be going wrong, because my parents loved each other and they really were suffering from the separation. Also, though, my dad was very heavily influenced by the Red Scare, the fact that Stalin had done so much harm. He felt like he was fighting the ghost of Stalin, and was, very aware of the idea of Eisenhower's theory of the domino theory, saying that if Vietnam falls, then all these other countries are going to fall, and then suddenly we'll have communism on our shores. Ultimately, that really wasn't the case, but again, he was convinced that he was fighting Stalin's ghost, and he was there as an advisor to a Psy-War effort. This is him and Major Vo Van Chan of the South Vietnamese Army. They worked together in a radio setting called Mother Vietnam. It was a propaganda station that was part of House 7, which included 5 other stations. This is House 7. It was just a warehouse kind of stuck in the city, down the street from the embassy. If you look on the lower right-hand side, you'll see a little soldier guarding it. One time, my mom wrote home to her mother and said, oh, don't worry about the bombing that was at the radio station. That wasn't Jim's radio station, because his is not heavily guarded since it's supposed to be a secret. In retrospect, I looked at that and I said, well, it wasn't heavily guarded, that means it was wide open and exposed at all times. But nothing ever did happen to the radio station. It ran much like any other station with writers and musicians. They actually did live broadcasts out into South Vietnam and also North Vietnam. They were trying to convince the North Vietnamese army to lay down their arms. You're so tired, you've been fighting for so long. Come home to the one true Vietnam, Mother Vietnam, South Vietnam. So while it was a propaganda radio station, it was under the Psy-War effort, it was also very gentle and soft. And my dad was really devoted to it. He wrote home to my mom once while we were still in Taiwan. But you know me, after I congratulated Wen Zong, I felt so proud and happy that I felt tears welling up, so I took off. They just wouldn't understand. There's so much that goes into each one of their little improvements that you have your heart and soul in each one, and you probably overreact when it comes off. So he really loved his work. Now, Karen shared a little bit about daily life for her. I wanted to give you a little glimpse of what it was like to be a child in Saigon. This is my brother and I and our dog Ducky. If you look in the back, you can see that these were the French doors that opened into the house. They were soft plastic. I asked my brother, older brother once, why aren't these real glass? And he told me, he goes, oh, in case of bombs, that way the glass won't shatter. And so I was very intrigued. I thought, well, that's great. Somebody thought about us and is protecting us by not putting in real glass. I didn't really think about the bombs, but I was already starting to normalize the situation. I was a 3rd grader at Phoenix Study Group, and they really tried to make it as much of a regular classroom setting as possible, regular school setting. But I'm the one in the front. I look very suspicious. I think I didn't like a stranger coming into the classroom. We went to the zoo. this was part of a brownies group that my mom started to try to give us things to do. We went out for a wonderful, relaxing day on the Saigon River. That same day, I asked my brother, same brother as the one who explained the windows to me, said, "Hey, look out there at the greenery on either bank." And I was like, "Oh, why?" He goes, "There could be Viet Cong anywhere." And I kind of looked at him and I didn't really ask, but I was like, "What are Viet Cong? Why would they be out there looking at us?" On another day, this is from a letter. I have so many letters from my mom, which really explains what was going on there. My dad said, "We should go sightseeing in Bien Hoa." My mom was like, "But wait, isn't it Get Americans Day?" Apparently there were rumors that on certain days, Americans would be targeted. So if you were out and about, especially outside of Saigon, and you were seen, you were gonna be fodder for the Viet Cong attacks. So my mom wrote home, "This seems to be a city of rumors. One does not know what to believe." And sure enough, in October, the demonstrations there got so bad that we were evacuated from school. Now, for many years, I thought this evacuation was because kind of against the whole war like it was in America, but it was really against the Thieu government, who was mistreating the Buddhist population so badly that people were up in arms about it. That was in October, on Halloween, we started to plan our trip to go on a vacation. And my mom wrote home, it's kind of an example of her writing in the back, "Well, if we get to Thailand and things seem bad, we'll just stay there." So again, kind of quipping, "Oh, well, don't worry about it. We've got a way to get out." When we returned home in January, she wrote home, the two men killed were ours. There was a lot of military action by then. The North Vietnamese were really making moves to get into Saigon. And she wrote, "Regarding the rocketing in Saigon, only one rocket fell inside the city limits at the other end of town," if that makes you feel any better. And can you imagine being at home and having your child in a war zone, writing, "Don't worry about that one rocket." And she said, "At this point, I don't know what to say, none of us do, but the Vietnamese are all very pessimistic about the situation. We'll just have to take it one day at a time." Then in February, my father at work asked the DJ, Mylon, what her family would do if the North Vietnamese army took over Saigon. If the communists took over, she said, "My father will shoot us and then commit suicide." So if you remember how much my father loved his work, really loved the people he worked with, and to hear from the main radio star that she was doomed to be shot by her own father and he was going to take his own life, really put the fire under my father, and he began to think deeply about what was going on. In March, and I show this picture of my brother bowling because his birthday was on March 16th, and my mom gave him a bowling ball. And looking back, I'm thinking, you never bring a bowling ball into your possession if you knew you were going to be leaving. So I found that a little bit ironic as I started to go over all my information. Things really began to fall apart though in March of '75. Karen's gonna jump over.
Yeah, I'm just gonna stand right there.
So in the middle of March, Pointe finally fell after a long battle. The first time the communists occupied a provincial capital. And what happened next kind of brought about the beginning of the end. The South Vietnamese army in that part of Vietnam fell apart as the officers abandoned their troops on the field, leaving them jumping on helicopters to save themselves. The soldiers on the ground, with no one to lead them, deserted. They had no concept of being a united army. They were just guys with guns. They were more concerned about their families than they were off to save them, along with hundreds of civilians from Pointe. They started a walk to the shore, to the coast, in the Nha Trang area for safety. This occurrence came to be known as the Convoy of Tears, as the communists shot into the crowds and killing hundreds. On March 30th, Da Nang fell. We didn't know how serious this was. We're sitting in Saigon, nothing bad ever happened in Saigon. We did not know still that the country was going to fall. We had no information, no concrete information. All we had was rumors. On April 4th, the first flight of Operation Baby Lift was scheduled to leave. On that day, because so many expats were leaving, including teachers from the school, I helped close the school, and I overheard people asking for volunteers to go on Operation Baby Lift to escort the children. I considered going, but I had two problems. My passport was hung up at immigration, waiting for an exit visa. My husband wanted to get me out of there, even though we didn't know what was going to happen. Everything might blow over and I could come back, but he wanted me to leave just in case. So my passport was waiting for an exit visa, and I wasn't ready to go. Emotionally or physically, I wasn't prepared. It was too fast, so I did not make it on that flight, and as you'll find out later, if I had made it on that flight, I wouldn't be here today. On April 8th, I heard an explosion in the morning that woke me up. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my camera, raced to the window, and captured this photo of the bombing of the presidential palace. The bomb missed, but the pilot had a revenge out against the government, which Kat may explain later. And I didn't know what was happening. If I wasn't scared before I was then, I didn't know if the city was under attack, if we were going to be under siege. My maid, Louie, had gone to the market, but she didn't make it. She rushed back and she said in her interesting French-English vocabulary, "Peut-être Americans come back." I said, "I don't think so, Louie. I don't think anybody's coming." So my first concern was conserving water in case we were under siege. Now drinking water was not easy to come by. We had to boil the tap water and then filter it through charcoal filters. But I had a lot of liquor bottles in the house. So I had her pour all the liquor out so that we could fill the bottles with water. And in the process, we managed to help ourselves to some sanity by drinking a little bit of rum and whatever she had, I don't remember. And so the next day, passport in hand, I grabbed this photo as I was leaving to board an Air Vietnam flight to Bangkok. And I remember at the time thinking, someday I'm going to want to remember this. And now when I look at that, all I feel is sad and grief and regret that we didn't do more. My husband stayed in Saigon because of his job. He was trying to make things work at the office. But on April 14th, finally we got evacuation instructions. Should it be felt necessary for U.S. personnel to report to their designated assembly areas, a coded message will be broadcast over American radio service. This message will consist of a temperature report for Saigon of 105 degrees and rising, followed by approximately the first 30 seconds of "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas." This message will be broadcast every 15 minutes for approximately 2 hours. If you hear the above message, report with travel documentation to your nearest assembly point. Stay tuned. American radio station FM 99.9, primary FM 91, secondary for further announcements. Even in times like that, there was the red tape. We had to have your documentation. But the evacuation was still not called for. We were left to our own devices. And back to Kat.
So I'm going to back up just a little bit. This is another day in the life of the kids. This was a small pool in the center of our house that helped my mom keep some sanity so we could swim there when she keep us busy. But on March 27th, So backing up of that almost 3 weeks, my mom had started to really panic, and she wrote home a letter that went back and forth, but she finally said to her mom, we might come out, we're not sure what's happening, we're so stressed, but don't expect me until you see the whites of my eyes. On the back of that letter, she wrote, tomorrow is the orthodontist, Good Friday, and packing. We'll be in contact one way or the other. Happy Easter, and pray for us and for Vietnam. So even amidst panic and rumors and imminent warfare, it seemed, she still had to take everyone to the orthodontist. On April 3rd, we departed, one day before the baby lift operation. And my dad wrote to my mom after and said, I just imagined you getting on the plane and having a martini, breathing a sigh of relief and relaxing. Well, we had quite the adventure on the way out. We left Guam, the engine was out, they had to jettison the fuel, go back to Guam, wet down the plane, we had to sit on the tarmac for hours until they could let us off, that it was safe. Then we spent the night, got back on the same plane, the engine was out again, we had to stop, redo the whole thing, and finally when we arrived in San Francisco, and it was cold, and then to Boise was 32, we were all dressed for Saigon heat, so we had virtually no clothes on, and went into the freezing winter of Idaho. My mom wrote in her day timer, weary. So April 4th was the baby lift flight that Karen talked about. Originally, my mom had booked us out on that because she had spent much of her time overseas helping out in orphanages and different other philanthropic efforts. So she was very attuned to the needs of others. She thought, well, we'll help on the baby lift flight. They're gonna need a lot of help with all those orphans. For one reason or another, and I believe it was because there was gonna be 8 of us, which would take up a lot of space, she decided we'll go out on the 3rd. And as Karen mentioned, had we been on the baby lift flight, it's very likely that we wouldn't be here now. Because of an error, it wasn't an attack, it was actually an error. Somebody didn't close a latch correctly. A door blew out and the plane went down not far from the airport, killing over half of the people. It turned out it was 125 babies died, 37 civilian women who were helping, 1 military woman, the military pilot. And as my father wrote after that, he just said, one tragedy here follows another. He just wrote, I cry. And there were reports that everybody in the city just felt like this was the final straw, things were just falling apart. And then of course there was the bombing of the palace by that, it was actually a defector, but when I read the backstory, this defector had seen his father killed by the South Vietnamese army, mutilated and thrown into a ditch. And he had vowed at that moment that he was gonna get back at the people who did that, and that's why he bombed the palace. So the whole war was so complicated. Still, and again, my father at the end, this is April 16th, really wanted to start getting, well, he'd already been planning, he wanted to get his staff out of danger. And he said, the last 2 weeks are so filled with action, you would never believe it. We're going along day by day, doing what must be done and preparing for quote unquote tomorrow. And really what he meant was the fall of Saigon, although nobody really knew exactly how that was going to unfold. So when he started to plan his House 7 evacuation, he was working on it from the beginning of April. They took off starting April 21st, and he wrote again home saying, your husband might be shot by the bureaucracy. So he knew he was risking his career and his life to get these people out of here. And he said, people just keep talking about it. They may try and then cry and say we are sorry, but I'm not operating that way. I may fail, but I intend to do what is necessary before the crunch comes and succeed. There are many details I can't write for obvious reasons. If I make it, it will be an odyssey worth writing a book about. If I don't make it, maybe it still will. And it was some years ago where I really felt compelled to start writing this story, so I'm always hoping that my dad is proud of the work I've done. He found his place at the very southern tip or edge of Vietnam, actually in the Gulf of Thailand, Phu Quoc Island, and he began ferrying his people down there in Air America airplanes. He only had, he has a stack of papers in his files that have these random notes on them, and one of the, number 9, is orders from the Joint General Staff that no evacuation will be made from Phu Quoc. So he was going down there ostensibly to keep broadcasting, and he was not to leave, no matter what. He also had them bringing medicine, newspapers for anything you might need, and he had his .38 caliber revolver. I remember the first time I saw this, I was like, I knew my dad was in the CIA, but I didn't know he had a gun. So this whole writing has been a voyage of discovery. On April 29th came the orders from the South Vietnamese government saying everybody needs to get out. All Americans out within 24 hours. So this is the actual telex my father received in Phu Quoc Island from CIA headquarters saying that with this receipt of the presidential message, we are going to get out of here by 3:45 local time, April 30th. So that's 3:45 in the morning. And he wished to advise that this will be the final message from Saigon Station. So that was the CIA. And he wrote, the main thing in there was like, it's been a long fight and we have lost. We have lost. This was the first American loss in our history. And it obviously it's hit us all hard. My father and his compatriots that were there working on Phu Quoc Island, radioed Saigon, what do we do? How are you guys gonna help? What can, you say get out of here, what are you gonna do? And they just said back, it's chaos up here, just get out any way you can. So there was no help, just like we abandoned the South Vietnamese army, my father was abandoned. Fortunately, it's like grace of God, there was the American Challenger was in the harbor, and he and his co-worker, Charles Taper, spoke with them. And the captain agreed to take them when he got orders in Saigon, and it went up to the 11th hour. It finally said, well, I guess we're not gonna get orders, but I can't just leave you here. So he agreed to take my father, his co-workers, and nearly 1,000 South Vietnamese people on his ship. Now remember, my father he had a short note he wrote to my mom on the 21st, but it took over two weeks at the shortest to get mail in the US from Saigon or from Vietnam. So my mom was back in Idaho not knowing what was going on, and she finally got this telegram on May 2nd. I'm aboard the American Challenger with all my people, doing okay. With today's technology, and we get instant updates about everything, I can hardly imagine her waiting 2.5 weeks to find out how he was, and seeing the news, of course, that Saigon was falling. This was from a Guam paper. 15,000 arrived, ragged and dazed. My father's had his 1,000 people who were all living mostly in Saigon. Another 4,000 refugees were taken aboard American Challenger. And so this is how it looked. They were on a deck for close to 5 days going across the Pacific, not really knowing what their destination was. They finally did end up in Guam. They were supposed to stop in the Philippines, but they finally found safe harbor in Guam. So 1,000 people whose country was completely gone. I don't know if you can even imagine that. You were there fighting for your country, hoping that it was gonna get better, and it doesn't, and now you have nothing. And in fact, all of their luggage had gotten attacked and ruined. But years later, we reconnected with this writer who worked in my father's office, and he wrote to us. He said, instead of flying out of Vietnam, your father had chosen a risk to stick with his collaborators until all of them were safe in the American rescue boats. Now hundreds of them and their families can breathe the air of freedom in America, and all of them still keep in their hearts the image and memory of their late great boss named Jim Welch, your father. When we got this letter, it confirmed all these, almost like rumors, because my parents had never told us these stories. I found the letters finally years later, so it confirmed everything that had kind of been floating in our family and made it real. So tomorrow, I think you know, is the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. It's a momentous anniversary. It's kind of getting lost in a lot of our news cycle right now, but it was a huge threshold for our country. A lot of our soldiers were not welcomed home, though it wasn't their fault. They had not chosen to go to the war, or if they had chosen, they had tried to serve most of them, or served honorably as they could in difficult, daunting, and unmanageable situations. when I began writing about Vietnam, I really felt like I couldn't do this without somehow like honoring the veterans. I didn't want to try to say that my story, especially if an 8-year-old, would somehow take over their story or usurp it. And in 2014, I had the opportunity to go to the wall. I didn't know exactly why I was going there, but I felt that it was something I had to do. And as I walked down from the beginning, I took this picture, and this man's name is John Grandforce. He was looking, this always chokes me up, he was looking for the name of his buddy who had been shot 3 days before he was meant to come home. And he found it that day, and I took this beautiful photo, and as I was looking at it on my camera, he walked away, and I ran to catch him, and I said, "Excuse me, sir, could I just ask your permission to use this picture?" And he said, "Well, what are you doing?" And I said, "I'm trying to write about Vietnam. I was there. My father had a rescue operation, and I just feel that I need to write about it." And he shook my hand, and he said, "People can't forget. We just can't forget." And I said, "I'll do my best." And he's since passed away, but when I looked him up and tried to find him, this was his Facebook photo. His wife also had this as his Facebook photo years later. So I felt like he gave me the benediction and the blessing that I really needed from the veteran forces, that what I was doing was serving the greater good of everything and not just telling my own story for the sake of my own story. But as you all know, the Vietnam era was giant in our history, and it's on the verge of being forgotten, but Karen and I are doing our best to share our stories in a way